back again with another new template walkthrough. This design is called Celebration. So set up to be a fun one, another fun one, but with that simple type of clean look. So it's still modern, but I think this would be a really cool one to use in a lot of different situations. But let's just take a look at the layer stack so we can see what's involved and what's what in here. So just starting at the top is our color grading layers. So a couple layers here grouped together. That's just going to be adding a little bit of contrast, a little bit of warmth and color. As always, you could expand this, increase or decrease these opacity values as you like, turn them off and on to get the look that you like. Below that, we have a couple layers. This is basically set up just to boost highlights. I specifically use them on the face just to, make that portrait pop just a little bit more. So we have two of these. The top one is kind of preset for your darker skin tones. The bottom is for lighter skin tones. So it's going to be simple as, making sure this black mask is selected and painting on there with a white brush to brighten those highlights up. Just below that, we have a couple layers clipped down here. So let's look at these kinds of as a section. So basically this is our foreground confetti in here. And it's preset with a color on here and with this little bit of foil texture. So this foil texture is really just added on these foreground, these larger pieces, because that's really what's going to give you most of effect versus the background stuff with a subject in there. So again, foil texture there. Then this is just a simple, color preset that you can come in, type in your own value, pick any color that you want to change that. Or if you would turn this color off, you're going to see that everything is preset to like this multicolored confetti type of look. So if you want more of that, just like really party celebration type look, that's going to be preset just by turning the color layers off. All right, so let's turn that back on and keep going down. Here's another foreground layer one. So again, the good thing about these, you can always grab these layers and you can kind of drag these and reposition them a little bit if you want them in a very specific spot. Then you can move those around. But same thing here, if you turn the color off, you're going to get the multicolor, and then it's got that foil texture just for those foreground ones to really add that dimension to those. On down, we've got some text right here. So basic text, just double click and you can change this to say whatever that you want. So just type that simply in. The link to the sample font that I'm using is on the product page as always. So a few layers of text right there. As typical, marked in red is where the subject's going to be placed within the design. So if you expand this, you can see it's going to tell you put the subject right here. We have a sample subject we'll turn on in just a second. Let's close that up. Coming on down, now's our background confetti layers. I wanted to do this in a few layers because I think it looks best to have some dimension in the color. So like if you're using all blue, you can see there's confetti, confetti, confetti. So all different background layers. But I think being able to layer the color looks a lot better as well too. So I just kind of have like a medium tone, dark tone, light tone. But you could make that anything you want. You could certainly make them all the same. Once again, if you turn these all off, you're going to find that multicolor is all preset and all of that as well. So by turning those colors off and these off would get you that multicolor look very quickly. So turning these back on here, and again, these are all the same, just double click, type in, use the picker tool, or come over and select any color that you want each of those to be. Coming on down is this background color cast. You can kind of see in all the highlights, it's picking up this little bit of this warm tone. I just think it looks nice in that background, but you could double click and you could change that tone. So if you wanted a cooler tone in there, or if you just wanted to go, again, something more purple, red, green, whatever you want, you can click in. It's going to add that tone in there, but it is preset to a little bit of a warm tone. Now there's some background shadow toning you can happen. You see if I turn this off, everything goes more to that warmer side. This is actually just controlling those shadows to push a little bit of blue in those shadows. Again, I just think that it looks nice. You could change this opacity or turn this off and on. Or if you wanted to change that tone, basically what this is a selective color layer. You could come up here into the colors. It's going to be set in the blacks right here. And you can see these sliders are just barely pushed around a little bit to add some color in there. So you can push those sliders around more if you wanted to. You're also going to see in the neutrals as well is where a lot of that blue is getting pushed. Again, so you could push that around and you could change all those tones by moving those sliders. But again, I have it preset just where I think it looks good, but the beauty is you can customize that to what you like. Below this is a little layer. This is just to help with any kind of banding in the gradient. What this is just like a noise texture layer. If we zoom in, let's get down here nice and close. You can see if I turn this off and on, there's just this little bit of texture being added over everything, and that's what's going to help control any banding in that gradient in the background. And it just adds a little bit of cool texture in there as well. This is our little corner. It's going to create the illusion that this is a floor running into the wall, so that corner really helps create that illusion. Below that is this large highlight on the floor, just to give this idea that this light is back here and reflecting off the wall down into this floor. You could change the opacity on this if you wanted to dim that down or anything. You could certainly do that there. Below that, this is that little highlight in the back of the floor, some more reflection there to create this kind of dimensional floor look. This is some shadowing. Again, just all these layers are used to build up this kind of effect on the floor. All right, the center background spot here is done in 3 layers of intensity. So 1, 2, and 3 right here. So 1 is going to be the overall, 2 is going to be a bit of a more hot spot, 3 is going to be even a stronger spot here. And you can see when we set this to like a darker background color, that's where you might want to tweak some of these a little bit. Then there's an overall background gradient, which is just giving us our darker shading at the top and bottom. And again, these are all gradient layers, so you could always come over here, pick the gradient tool, and you could change all these. If you want to make it a little bit more dramatic, you could bring that in and make things darker on the edges, where you could push the size of that around just like that. But again, that's all can be changed in here with the gradient tool. And then at the very bottom is our overall background color. So again, come in, just pick the color you want. You can see as we go darker, that's where you have that really bright hot spot. Now with your subject in, that could look pretty cool. But that's where you might want to come up and either turn a few of these off if you wanted to go more subtle of a spotlight like that. Where you could just do 1 or 2 of them on. So again, that's where you might want to play with which of these are on or off, what their opacities are. It's just going to be based on what you set as that background color. All right, so let's back out of these changes. There we go. And let's go up here. We'll just turn our subject on and customize some colors here. And I'll show you my technique for grounding the subject in here. So subject turned on. I do think this is a fun one for like dance and cheer, but I also think some of the other sports, football and soccer and things like that also look really cool as I've played with those. Now this will very much work if you wanted to do 3/4 without having the feet in there. So let's say we wanted to make our subject a little bit bigger. I would just make sure that the feet get cut off at the bottom. And still very much works like that. I think it looks really great like that actually. But if you wanted to do the full length of course is a little bit slower of a process for sure, but it also has a lot more punch. I think if you're doing something special, senior banners or something like that, where maybe you have a minute to add some grounding in there, I think it looks super cool. So before we set the colors, let's talk about how I would do that. Let's just turn these foreground layers off just so we can see our feet down here. So for me, I try to make things pretty simple here. What I would do is just duplicate this subject by holding Alt or Option and dragging down below it to create a copy. I'm going to go ahead and rasterize this because it's a smart object. Command or Control T to transform. Then I'm going to right click over here and flip vertically. Then I'm going to bring the feet down here to kind of line up. Now you're going to see we have a gap here. One of the issues with trying to automate ground shadows and things like that is whenever the feet aren't on the same ground plane, that's where things begin to get a little bit complicated. But what I'm going to do is just bring this foot up to start to touch here a little bit. And then I'm going to right click and I'm going to do a distort on this. And then I'm going to come over and grab this side. And I'm just going to push that up and maybe pull this side down. So basically I'm just kind of skewing this to where the feet line up just a little bit. And it doesn't have to be perfect for this effect. All right, Going to click apply there. Now, next thing I want to do is I don't want this to be like a glossy reflection as far as just, like a mirror. I'm going to do a Command or Control U, and I'm just going to go ahead and make this black. And then I'm going to come up here to Filter and Blur, and I'm just going to add a little bit of Gaussian blur to this. Maybe around 10. Yeah, somewhere between 10 and 12 probably. Let me see what 11 looks like. That looks pretty good. Just a little bit of softening there. But then I'm also going to drop the opacity. So I want this to go kind of like a dark gray almost reflection. All right, something kind of, yeah, kind of in there, around 40% or so. I think looks pretty good. All right, so that's just going to be that simple reflection. But now we need to add a little bit of ground shadow. So I'm going to zoom in here close to the feet. Let's move this around. I'm going to add a blank layer here. I'm going to grab a brush, set to black, soft edge brush. Let's bring the flow down, yeah, 10, 15%, somewhere between there. And now I'm just going to, first thing I want to do is make a little bit of ground contact shadow. So right under this foot here, I'm just going to use this soft brush to paint where the foot would be in contact with the ground. Something like that. Then I'm going to do the same thing under this toe right here. So again, that's just like that contact shadow. That's the first. Now I'm going to zoom out just a little bit. I'm going to do another blank layer. And I'm going to just make this kind of simple here. So I'm going to do a few brush strokes with this shadow out this way. A few with it out this way. Like so. And then I'm going to zoom out one more time. So I'm going to go to Filter, Blur, and this time I'm going to do a motion blur. I want to make sure it's set to 0, so it's going just a side-to-side blur. And then just, if it's so small, you can still tell like the paint stroke marks, we don't want that. We want that to really blur out like it's a shadow being cast. Something like that looks pretty good. You can even play with that opacity. Let's bring that opacity down a touch. And I just like to do this in a few quick layers. The next layer is going to be to add some more darkening right under the main part of the feet and body right here, like so. We're going to add a little bit of blur to that. Filter, blur, a little bit more motion blur. And I'm just going to keep, I think that same one looks good right there. Now I'm going to zoom all the way out to see if I want to add a little bit more. So let's try one more layer where this is going to be a little bit of a bigger, you can kind of see a bigger kind of patch of shadow like this. Filter, blur, motion blur one more time. And I'm going to just let that expand even more. Now I'm going to play with the opacities of these to get something I like the look of here just a little bit. Because you want it to be kind of there, kind of subtle at the same time. So something like that. That would work for me. And this reflection one, you could play with the amount of that. So just something like that, I think that looks pretty cool. So the idea is I'm not trying to create necessarily this 100% realistic shadow. I just want it to be nice and soft and directional so it feels like the overall body's casting a shadow. And then that little bit of shadow reflection there kind of helps give the idea that this floor's got some shine to it. All right, so that's how I'd ground my subject in and make it, pretty quickly to do. That doesn't take that long. Again, I know in a volume scenario it takes a little bit longer, but if you're doing it by hand, it can be pretty quick. All right, so to set some colors, of course, the easiest thing would do if you like the lighter background, it's just going to be to come change, the confetti colors. So let's turn our foreground on. So let's start with some foreground color. We'll pick a color from the uniform. Let's see, maybe that mid color looks pretty good. Let's come down to this one. I think that looks pretty good. This is where I like the process. This is really quick to just be able to come in and click. Now here I want some dimension, so I want to pick like a mid-tone. For me, I kind of like a mid-tone on the top one. More of a shadow tone at the bottom. I think I want to stick with this yellow, but then I'll manually bring that darker. And then a brighter one down here. So again, we'll start with that yellow, then maybe brighten that up a little bit with the slider manually like this. There, that looks pretty cool. So that would be the simplest way that you could set that. But then you could also try to adjust the background. So if we want to address the background color, maybe we wanted to go with a little bit darker or more of an actual color tone in that background, which I think looks really cool too. Let's go there, but let's desaturate that a little bit by bringing it out and a little bit darker. So I think that bright spotlight looks really cool. Even on the darker backgrounds, it really makes things feel shinier. But this is where I was saying you could turn some of this off if you wanted that to be like a little bit of a softer spot. Or even on this large floor highlight, you could turn some of those values down and thing. Instead of color dodge, you could play with that on screen or overlay or some of the other blending modes. Overlay looks really cool right there as well. So let's say we set that to overlay. And then on your confetti color, I might want to brighten that up or go with a different tone or something, depending on what you're trying to do. You could do the blacks, black and gold, or you could go with more of like a white or gray or brighter look. I mean, it looks good with the yellow too. I'm just trying to show some different samples of what could be done, because it's so easy to kind of move and push these around and things. It's very easy to see what you want to do. But I think I like the yellow. I like to always look at it to see. So we'll back that out. One thing I might do on the foreground stuff is just make that a bit brighter so it stands out against the background more. So that looks really cool like that as well. Then we could just set the name. So let's come up here. So instead of sharks, this is... Oops, spelled wrong. Hornets. Last name. First name. And then if you wanted to change these colors, it's just simple text. So you could come up here and you could pick one of the matching colors here. Maybe we'd change the stroke line so that pops off there a little bit by making that white. I think it actually looks better in black, stands out more. There we go. And then same thing here, we could pick some of these if we wanted to really make it kind of matchy. So that way it doesn't stand out quite so much. But yeah, you can see really simple to come and set this up and do some different looks and things pretty quickly. But I'm really excited to see how you guys use this. I do think it's a really fun one. So I'd love to see what you guys are doing with it. As always, please feel free to share. Either join us over in the JHP Backgrounds Facebook group and share in there, or just share, anywhere on Facebook and tag me or Instagram, anything like that. Again, love to see what you guys are doing, and I'm excited to see, how you guys use this. Let's just finish up by adding a little bit of boost here on the face. So picking the white mask for the lighter skin, I can come through and just paint in a little bit there. And you can see if it goes a little bit too bright, then I'm just going to use my opacity to just tone that down a touch. Just give me a little bit of boost there in the face. And that looks super cool. All right, so can't wait to see what you guys do. As always, I look forward to seeing you on the next one. And I'm just going to do one last little thing here because I'm here. There we go. All right, guys. See you on the next one. Thanks, everyone.